Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. Hopefully everyone's doing good, eh? And today we're going to be looking at a Type 2 hypervisor. At the moment I'm currently installing Windows XP on both Type 2 and Type 1 hypervisors, and we're going to be explaining the differences and maybe give you a couple of ideas of which one could be good for you, depending on your use by case. Everyone's a little bit different, so without further ado, let's get into it. So what is a hypervisor? So we'll start off with that. So if you're not familiar with computers and virtualization, a hypervisor is a environment that you put a operating system in. So you might as well say it's a virtual computer inside a physical computer. You've got two methods of doing this, which is, as I said before, a Type 1 hypervisor or a Type 2 hypervisor. So a Type 2 hypervisor, what you see on your right here, is what you call a operating system hosted hypervisor. So you have an operating system like Windows, Mac, Linux. In this case, I have Windows 10 installed as the primary operating system. You install the software on top of the primary operating system, which is the VirtualBox in this case, and then you install the operating system in the virtual machine, which is VirtualBox. So there are pros and cons about both. I will go through my own personal pros and cons. Everyone's got their own pros and cons if they've worked with both. I've personally worked with Type 2 hypervisors for years, so I'm still getting familiar personally with Type 1 hypervisors, but I'm loving it already. But what I've noticed about Type 2 hypervisors, the downfall is if you're using a heavy operating system that's primarily sucking up all your resources, because your resources are shared between the primary operating system and the virtualized operating system. So in my case, I've got 1.3 gigs used of RAM for Windows 10. I've only got 2 gigs and 512 megabytes of RAM for the Windows XP virtualized operating system. That will be okay like for a Windows XP, but if you're talking about running Windows 7 on Windows 10 or Windows 10 or Windows 10, which demands more resources, you're going to come across some lags and things like that. So just don't be surprised. But the uprise with Type 2 hypervisors is if you're not technically savvy and if you don't want to modify your hard drive and you just want to be that type that wants to play around with operating systems, you might have an OS for work, whatever you use by cases. I'm personally just mucking around. This will be perfect for you because you don't have to really do anything technical like creating bootable USBs and installing it, or wiping your operating system and installing it, making your computer a server. We see with a Type 2 hypervisor, you just install a piece of software on your current operating system and then you can install and run your virtual machines. I do recommend just make sure you've got plenty of RAM if you're running multiple virtual machines, especially if you're using a Type 2 hypervisors for servers. If you are going to be using servers, it's recommended to use servers on a Type 1 hypervisor, which we're going to be talking about now. So on the left side, I have a Type 1 hypervisor on the left. So a Type 1 hypervisor is a what you call a bare metal hypervisor. So it's a piece of software or an operating system that's designed for virtualization. Windows is designed for all sorts of things. Virtualization is just one thing it can do out of so many. But with a Type 1 hypervisor, it's a operating system that gets installed over the metal, and it's dedicated, and it only uses a minimum amount to run, so it tries its best to stay out of the way in terms of RAM and resources, and also it is dedicated for your virtual machines. With a Type 1 hypervisor, you do reach almost native support, so you do reach almost like it's actually been installed on the metal itself, hence why they call it bare metal. The pros about a Type 1 hypervisor is the scalability. So With a Type 1 hypervisor, you've got to have a designated computer that's designated as a server. So, in this case, I'm just using a web client, which is a web console to actually view into the virtual machine. But the processor itself is on the designated computer, which I've actually showed in the past tutorial about Type 1 hypervisors. The downfall, I've actually haven't really noticed much downfall with a Type 1 hypervisor, but there are a lot of pros actually. Like you can migrate easily from one host to another when it comes to operating systems and all that. So if the current node that I'm using goes down on a Type 1 hypervisor, I can just launch another node, or another node could be just ready to go, and you can have an exact copy of virtual machines. So a Type 1 hypervisor, you might as well say, is dedicated for virtualization. You just got to make sure you've got the virtualization technology enabled in your BIOS in order to do this, and also QEMU KVM support as well. Just make sure your thing supports it. With a Type 1 hypervisor, there is more of a setup. So you've got to have, as I said, a computer designated as a server. You've got to have it connected directly to your modem. You don't want it through a Wi-Fi, because a lot of Type 1 hypervisors don't use Wi-Fi and don't like it for very good reasons. Only because of the slowness and the airtime of Wi-Fi, especially when you're running multiple servers. You need the best speed you can get, which is LAN. So yeah, so the use by case would be different depending on how you want your setup. You can with a Type 1 hypervisor, you can actually share your virtual machines. So I could actually create a virtual machine, and once it's created, I can actually designate it its own username and password. So you might as well say I can make people virtual computers where they can use them and do whatever they want with them. But as it says, it's a virtual computer, so unless they've got software or something to clone it and migrate it so they can take it to their own place, you can only use it here. Or you can set up to use your virtual computers over the internet as well. So yeah, but I'd say overall Type 1 hypervisors are good. Like I can actually shut that console down and actually just jump on another device, like even my phone, and then I can resume using the hypervisor from there. So for the Type 1 hypervisor, I'm using Proxmox 7 for my hypervisor. It's at the moment for the hardware, I'm using only 4 gigs of RAM and 4 CPUs, so it's running pretty good considering I'm only using this as a home lab and just want to do a bunch of virtual machines and explore. So hopefully I explained it good, and you've got the differences between a Type 1 and a Type 2. As I said, everyone's use by case is different. If you just want a simple setup with one computer, a Type 2 hypervisor is the way to go. But if you want a more complex setup, and you want to, if you're one of those guys that are techie and like to muck around with things, a Type 1 hypervisor is good for that. So without further ado, hopefully you have a good day, and hopefully you learned something new. And until next time, ciao ciao.